the next slate of movies that we're going to talk about are movies that you put on after everyone's gone to bed, sort of thing, where like you just need some time to like decompress from everything.
Thoroughly de-Christmas with like
Yes.
some late night action.
Yes. Yeah. And the ones that I ended up suggesting are horror movies, because I'm a huge horror fan. Like we just got done with my favorite season ever, which was October Halloween season, and stuff. So this one is stars Megan Fox, and it's called Jennifer's Body, and it is a horror movie where things go wrong with this sort of like satanic sacrifice, and Megan Fox's character Jennifer basically leaves her body, but her body's still going on, and becomes like this killing machine that kills the men in her school in a lot of ways, and does it in like these graphic, violent sort of ways. And it's directed by a woman. I forget the name. I should have written it down, but the clear message of it is commentary on how women are literally objectified and turned into these walking models of like the male gaze and stuff, and it sort of turns that gaze back around and goes like, okay, this woman now has agency now that we've taken away everything that stops her, that inhibits her in a lot of ways, and that is really refreshing. It's a really refreshing take on horror movies, where usually the women are the first to go, and stuff, until the like final pure girl survives.
Right.
So
Yeah. The virgin
a
at
really
the end.
great commentary on that sort of thing, and of being like overtly sexual without like it's overt sexuality with the hint of danger for the men who are her victims in a lot of ways, but it's sort of punishing them for their objectification of her, which I really like in a horror movie.
You know, I mean, the way you describe it, it makes sense that it's here in this category. But I feel like in a lot of ways, it's a farce that we didn't read as farce for a decade. You know,
Yeah.
in 2009, when this movie came out, if you had told me that, you know, a decade on, that I would be, first of all, that I'd be doing any of this shit, I wouldn't have believed you for a goddamn second. But that also I would be having this like nuanced conversation about the sexual ethics, and saw it as anything other than what it looked like on the surface. I mean, if you only knew this movie from the previews that were playing back in 2009, you are seeing this like highly sexualized, vaguely sapphic relationship between Megan Fox, who was like hot off of the Transformers films and very much embodied all of the objectification and male gaziness that you're talking about. And the, you know, like Diablo Cody wrote it when she had just won the Oscar for Juno, and nobody seemed to get it. And as much as I really love, this is a great late night movie for me. This is absolutely one that I will get drunk and put on every couple of years. But I'm almost more interested in the conversation around this movie than around the movie itself, because the way we've interpreted it has changed so much in the last decade.
Yeah, it's been interesting to sort of go back and reinterpret it and realize that, like you said, Megan Fox was just coming off the Transformers movies, where she has spoken up about how she was treated on set by Michael Bay and objectified by him, and like told to do like creepy sexualized things that were not good. It was not a healthy environment for her as an actress and stuff. And then to go on to this movie where she is the object taking back her subjectivity in a lot of ways, to use academic terms there, but she is the she is the victim, sort of turning that around and getting revenge on the men who had victimized her in a lot of ways. And that really is fascinating to watch, especially as we've watched Megan Fox. Like I grew up going to the Transformers movies. Like they started coming out when I was in high school, and I had grown up watching Shia LaBeouf on the Disney Channel and stuff. And to see like the trajectory of their two careers, following the Transformer movies has been really, it says a lot about how women are treated in Hollywood and stuff. And I think the way we've reinterpreted that movie in light of the Me Too movement and in light of our like sort of national reckoning on sexual assault, especially in Hollywood, has been really fascinating to watch in a lot of ways. And I hope it's a movie that more people discover, because it's kind of a cult classic at this point, but like not a lot of people have actually seen it, at least not people in my friend groups.
Sure, and
So,
it really is a lot of fun. You've
mhm,
got this sort of like amped up, like metal kind of
mhm,
demonology and sexuality and all of these things, but in a way that is like at times perhaps very graphic, but it's
mhm.
even when it's being like graphic, it feels more like hyperbole. I mean, this
Yeah.
is a movie that I feel like with a small number of edits probably could have slipped under that PG-13 line and is
Mhm.
kind of just barely over it, even though it gives you the feeling of like, of like metal, but like metal
Mhm.
that you bought at Target, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It is very like, it's not a slasher film in the way that most horror movies are nowadays. Like there's been over the last 10 years we as a culture have really gotten into these slasher sort of movies, the Saw movies being really popular, the Purge
Torture
movies
porn and
being,
that kind of
yeah,
body
it
dysmorphia
doesn't
fears.
it doesn't go into that sort of body horror. So it's one of those that's much more of a psychological thriller, um, in a lot of ways, even though there is gore. And it's really like fascinating in that way, in that it turns horror on its head. And I think that's also one of the reasons that it's been received differently in the decades since it came out, is because horror itself as a genre has changed to
Hmm.
be like, to go back more to its roots as a social commentary. And so I could talk about horror for ages. So
Yeah, well, and I dare anybody who hasn't seen it to go and watch a original trailer, like from the year
mhm,
that it came out, like a 2009 advertisement for this film, and then try and justify that with Diana's description of it as a psychological thriller. Because I don't think
yeah,
that you're wrong, but I also see how there's so much about that movie
mhm,
that kind of just went over all of our heads at the time.
yep,
And I was very hormonal and at like a very particular age, so I was definitely interpreting Megan Fox's body, Jennifer's body, I mean,
mhm,
in a very different kind of lens. And so I'll just say that I have appreciated the opportunity to change my relationship
mhm,
with sort of movies from that era. I mean, Adam Brody is in it and gets his
mhm,
just desserts, and that's the
yeah.
most like 2009 thing that you've ever gotten to say.
Yeah, it's really fascinating in that way. In some ways it's doing the same things as Promising Young Woman is,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like casting. Like Adam Brody is that nice guy that everybody loved on the OC. He's the guy who invented oh gosh, what does he call it? It's not Festivus,
Oh,
but he does like,
Chrismica.
yeah, Chrismica. Um in the thing, like that's the thing that a lot of people knew him from, and so to see him
Mm-hmm.
like be a jerk who gets his just desserts and stuff in that movie is kind of satisfying in a lot of ways.
Oh,
So
now I'm just wondering what happened to Rachel Bilson.
yeah.
But you had one more movie for us, and this is one I actually haven't seen yet, so I'm really excited to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts on it.
Yeah, this is one, it's also a horror movie that is very sex positive in a lot of ways, but the plot doesn't immediately strike you that way. It is called Cam, and it is a sort of found footage horror movie of a sex worker who does cam videos. She's a cam girl. She does
Oh man,
a
if
lot
you
from her.
tell me
Yeah.
that there is a horror movie about a cam girl, my head immediately goes to, women chopped up in the freezer and like
Mhm.
all of those sorts of tropes. So I'm this is a hard pitch, but I'm excited to hear
Yeah,
about it.
but this one takes it in a different direction, where she is somebody who is successful, has made her living off of this. She loves doing the work. Like it's a very positive portrayal of sex work and she suddenly her entire career gets compromised by like this it's sort of half paranormal, half computer virus sort of thing that starts taking her identity online and starts like removing her ability to make money, to make her career, to do things that she has become accustomed to do. And like she tries to go to the police and they don't believe her because she's a sex worker and they don't want to do anything about it. And that's compounded by the fact that it's online and police are like, yeah, online stuff doesn't matter,
Right.
sort of stuff, even though
So
it
so
really
it's the net,
does.
but for sex
Yeah.
workers.
Yeah, but it's never about punishing her for being a sex worker. The
Mm-hmm.
entire horror of it is that like something is happening to her and she is being gaslit by people around her. She doesn't know how to resolve this. Um and stuff, and eventually like ends up like fighting with the computer trying to get whatever this force or this entity is to give her life back, and stuff. And it's a very well built tense horror um that works really well, I think.
Yeah, well, and if we're
Yeah.
gonna talk about horror as sort of a like hyperbolic exaggeration
Mhm.
of our very real fears, I mean, we've had Amberly Rothfield on this show
Mhm.
a number of times talking about the deplatforming and the lack of banking access, and
Mhm.
we like have discussed what has been going on and off again and on with OnlyFans, and I mean,
Yes,
these are
yeah.
in some ways very real fears for a lot of folks in our audience. And I think that there's a lot of
Mhm.
merit to exploring that through art in this way.
Yeah, and it does it in a really interesting and fascinating way. Like the reason I put it on the list is that like it is a movie where the sex worker is the victim, but not in the way that it's sort of this like, oh, she got killed because she was doing this or whatever.
Hmm.
Like it's much more nuanced, and it's much more um positive toward the concept of sex work than you would expect from typical horror movies, and stuff, which are usually about punishing women for having sex, whether or not they're getting paid for it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this is our late night horror film. But
Mhm.
how difficult of a pitch is this? If everybody's a little drinky and it's 11 o'clock and it's like just you and
Mhm.
dad in front of the TV, is this one that you can easily sell?
Not my dad. Getting him to watch Deadpool was hard. Um, but like I have a group of friends who are all like horror buffs, and I can see this being a movie that I could get them to sit down and watch. And stuff after our annual Christmas get together, kids have gone to bed, we're all sitting in the living room talking. We want to watch a horror movie. Yeah, I can see us putting it on. So,
Yeah. Well, sounds like a good time. I may
mhm.
actually do my best to catch it this weekend, but it'll be good to have it in my back pocket over the next six
Yeah.
weeks or so as we're dealing with family and everything else. I'll throw out my quick pick real quick is the movie It Follows. If you haven't caught it, this is a great little semi indie horror film. Really taut, really tense. It explores some like very interesting ideas around sexuality and particularly that experience of being a teenager where
Mhm.
you are like dealing with the stress and anxiety of sexuality in a world that is seemingly devoid of adults. You know, that's one of the most
Yeah.
interesting things about this movie when you watch it back is that there are no adults to be seen, even
Mhm.
as these teenagers are dealing with like some very uh, big picture, like adult types of problems. And it explores it in a way that is sex positive, but is also like very aware of sort of the
Mhm.
grunge and the grime and the grossness of that part of life. And I definitely think it's worth a watch and maybe a good late night palate cleanser when you've watched too many sappy Christmas movies.
Yeah, that is one that when it first came out, that was one of the ones that I saw like right when it first came out. And it fascinates me as a movie, especially as a horror fan, because it turns that trope of like punishing people for having sex and punishing people for not being virgins and stuff on its head in such a way, and it's genuinely scary. In so many spots. There are lots of good jump scares in it. So if you enjoy a good jump scare,
atmospheric and
yes,
and like scary, but also very very easy to follow. I mean, there's
yeah,
very little plot.
yep,
The story is compelling enough. So to me, it really does fit that late night kind
mhm,
of vein.
yeah, absolutely.